And on this episode of the Prophetic Worship Podcast, I am joined by my friend Louise Reid as we talk about how to crack open your congregation and release them into full expression of worship. Join us. Hello and welcome to the Prophetic Worship Podcast. I am McFarlane and today we are joined by my lovely friend Louise Reid.
Hello everybody.
How are you, Louise?
I'm good, Ali. I'm looking forward to this.
Good.
This is great.
Now, we have known each other for about 3 years. Do you know that that's the truth?
No idea.
That's the truth. I love it when this happens. Okay, so we initially met because I was being trained to be an Emmanuel coach.
Oh, was that when I met you?
Which is, it's one of the things that we use for inner healing here at GPA.
Yeah, it's an inner healing and deliverance approach.
Yeah, and a very good one actually at that. And so I was being trained, and so I had to get on a call with you just I think every week or every other week for about a year.
I'd forgotten that's where we started out together, and you were really easy to work with.
Oh, I felt so like connected to you, and I really like, this person knows all of my deepest trauma.
Do you know, the fact that I didn't remember that that's where we first met tells you that I have completely not remembered anything about the intimate secrets that you told me at the time.
Well, so we met online, so that was great. And then that was about a year. We were in the middle of COVID, so we couldn't actually meet in person. And then you became part of the British Isles Council of Prophets, and you turned up at a gathering in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time that we met in person. Do you remember this?
No. I'm not doing well,
so
am I?
I had just come on staff, okay? I am like the junior worship girl, and Emma has introduced me to the whole staff team as a senior, well-being human being. And I had literally done one Emmanuel, I think. And, and Emma's very like, I see the future in you way. And so I was dossing about as like the little junior in worship, and I walked through this room that we're not really supposed to be in. And as I walk through this room, you spot me, having been in conversation with me for a year, and across the room, in front of the whole room of the British Isles Council of Prophets, the most senior prophets in our nation, Louise Reid shouts, "Oh, Ali McFarlane, my favourite sex therapist."
Did I really? How on earth did that come out of my mouth?
And I was like...
That's right, because you were looking after sex education and working with young people and teenagers.
Yes, here's the context.
And with a level of not just education, but therapy as well. Yes. Now I remember, but I don't remember shouting
So you shout this in front of the whole room. Yeah, so that's the context, is that I was a sexual health teacher. I was working with young people.
You were.
That's what I did for a living. And to be honest, it's better than what Emma often shouts, which is, Ali McFarlane, she's a sex worker.
Yes.
And that has got us into many a problem because she doesn't know that she said it. I don't clock that she said it. And so no one puts context to that.
Well, Ali, can I just say, those young people who were under your tutorage and your direction, they were blessed because, my goodness, you were just so great with those young people and telling them what they needed to know.
Sure.
And So.
Yeah, to be fair, I did absolutely love it. Mm-hmm. But so that's our a little bit of our history. And then, of course, you moved to Glasgow and you started on staff here at GPA.
Yes, we came to Glasgow in 2022, I think it was.
Okay.
What year is this? 2024. Yes, so just 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you moved here as a prophet to be part of our team, along with your husband Nigel, who is an apostle. And you came from a background of being church leaders, and you in particular led worship for decades.
Yes. I think I first led worship when I was in a church context, was when I was about 18.
Okay.
And I remember it really clearly. So since then.
Cool.
I'm not telling you how long ago that was.
We'll say, at the ripe age of 30.
That's 40
only
years.
40 years?
I'm 58, so that's 40 years.
Well, you're looking well.
You are looking at somebody who, in 40 years, has managed to lead worship knowing only probably 16 chords on the guitar. So I'll tell you, that is good going.
That is good going. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that time in your life, the journey, your journey through worship, and then even how it kind of came up, like into the prophetic, how that sat in your worship, and just your experience with that.
Well, my first memory of having an instinctive response in worship was probably when I was about maybe 9 or 10.
Okay.
And I was in a church meeting, and it was sung worship with an instrument that was led by an electric organ, and it was healthy and it was hearty. And I remember looking around the room, and the level of lack of physical engagement with what was going on struck me. And then I looked, and above everybody, I saw them as I was looking at this group of people, and they were like bottles of champagne with bubbles inside them. And it was literally like rows of bottles of champagne, and they all had a cork in the top. Wow. And it was the first kind of prophetic picture I ever had, but it was in the context of worship. And I instinctively knew that there was power and there was life inside of these people. They weren't dead, but the cork needed to be uncorked in order for the expression to come out. And I think really at that young age, I had a passion for the expression of an inward reality, particularly in worship, that really wasn't seen very much in those days in the church. So that's kind of where it all started off. And I remember I used to play the piano, but worship wasn't a thing where young people really got involved. In fact, my mother used to play the piano in our church. She was a very, very good pianist. But it wasn't until then, late teens, I picked up a guitar and decided, let's do something with this. And I had to be the one who, nobody was saying to me, Louise, you could do this, or nobody was encouraging me in that sense. It wasn't a thing. I just thought, let's have a go.
Yeah.
Let's do this. And got a group of musicians together.
That's fun. And did you have leadership when you were 18 that were just willing to let you do that? How did that look?
They let me have a go.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And did they celebrate your want to pop the cork?
I don't know that they knew what I was doing any more than I knew.
Okay.
I just knew that there was more. There's got to be more. And I was in a very wonderful church that would teach actually quite a lot about worship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it was the understanding of the worth of God and the worth of Jesus. And it was brilliant teaching. But there wasn't a corresponding expression that was releasing the worship that was innately in people. It was a little bit, but not so that I went, this is it.
Okay.
There's something here that is a true offering and a sacrifice to God.
Yeah.
So that's where I started.
Yeah, the worth of God is obviously an amazing foundation for a place to come from when it comes to leading worship or worshipping in a space. And I think it's probably the most well-known answer when you ask worship leaders, why do you worship? The most common answer is because he's worthy. As you journeyed in worship and through leading worship, what were your other revelations of the whys of worship, and what motivated you to press in for more? Was there more language that you had around that?
Well, it started to develop in me, and an understanding. I mean, quite honestly, in the early days, quite often it was about song choice and learning how to put songs together and music together that went somewhere, that rather than start, stop.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking a long time ago.
Love it.
A long
so
time
good.
ago.
Yeah.
But I think I suddenly got a handle on worship changes things.
Okay.
Worship changes me. Worship changes an atmosphere. Worship does something. There's a substance in worship that not only does it touch the heart of God, but it seems to shift atmospheres. So I would notice that the heartier the dare I say, the better, the more engaged we were in worship as a group, the easier it was for the preacher to preach or for us to minister.
Yeah.
Whereas if we stayed in that very kind of left-brained or start-stop, where we really didn't push in, it felt like everything was just a little bit maybe sterile.
Yeah.
But worship, suddenly for me, I realized this is a birthplace. This is a place of conception. Okay, Lord, what is it, the place of conception? Oh, it's the place of the conception of all things, because worshipping him, being in his presence, and even better, not just individually in his presence together, but corporately together. Oh my goodness, something is shifting and something is happening.
Yes.
So yes, so worship changes things.
Amazing. I think like even just as you speak, it's really obvious that you sit in the office of a prophet. I think most people who question the journey of worship and who like really what you're talking about is the strategy of worship, the fact that it shifts things, it changes things. And most people who are wired that way, I would say, sit in a prophetic stream. And when did you realize in your worship journey that there was a prophetic anointing on your worship? Was there a moment where you thought, oh, that was prophetic, or did someone tell you that you were a prophet? Like, when did that kind of all come together and make sense for you?
Well, I would love to say that it was really clear. It's only as I look back, I see the different pointers and times. So, for instance, in worship, I always had this pursuit of God, wanting to see him, hear him, feel him, sense him. That actually, you could almost say, well, Louise, that's not about giving worship. That's looking for something from him. And I realized, oh my word, I must be a real mess. I'm always looking for something from him. And that's why it kind of got me into the healing and pastoral route.
Okay.
Because I realized how much need I had. But then there was a phase where I realized I feel like our worship is like getting on an aircraft. We're supposed to be going somewhere, but we spend all our time getting people onto the aircraft,
Yes.
getting them in their seats, reading them the safety instructions. And then we might have a little jolly around the airport, the tarmac. But the darn thing never takes off because we're half an hour in and we're still, around the tarmac. And I'm just using that as an expression. Another expression was, I just got tired of what I used to call cul-de-sac worship.
Wow.
Where we were going somewhere, but it was just like a flat ride. And then it was like, oh my goodness, and we're going round in a circle because we've hit a roundabout. I'm looking for the open road. There's more here.
Okay.
And I think we need to understand how important pastoral worship is. I'm going to call it pastoral worship.
Yes, it's good.
And I'll put the pastoral and the priestly together, where we're honoring God, we're bringing people into an experience of the character of God in our worship. We're using words that help people to express worship and even to learn more about the character of God.
Yes.
It's great. It's wonderful. It's lovely. It's precious. And I love even the intimate side of that. I love the pouring oil on Jesus' feet, all of that side of worship, the closeness, the intimacy. I could live there. I mean, in fact, the last couple of days, I pulled out an old song. I don't know whether you even know it. It's one that talks about, you don't know the cost of the oil
from my alabaster box. CC Winans.
Exactly.
Oh, that one makes me so...
It is. I mean, even saying the words, I can just feel...
The room grew still.
It is just...
made her way to Jesus.
It is just amazing. And to identify with Mary as she poured out her oil. And, I don't know the cost of your worship, and you don't know the cost of mine. And to be in that place together, whether individually or together as a group, so powerful.
Yeah.
So powerful. But Mary didn't stay there.
True.
there was more to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a place that we have to fairly consistently go to.
Yeah.
But I started to get itchy feet in
Sure.
worship. And honestly, a little bored. Because I knew there was more.
Yeah.
And then started, now, I used to annoy people because, I mean, at times my husband did say to me, Louise, you've invented a new type of worship. It's called angry worship.
My mum says that to me all the time. She says, you always look so angry when you're worshipping. And I'm like, I'm just taking it really seriously. I'm tearing down strongholds, you know, like.
And I had to look at that. It's like, I'm not angry.
No.
But I am at some level a little frustrated.
Yes.
And it's like, Lord, I want to be one who with unveiled face beholds your glory and is transformed into your likeness. And it's my hunger.
Yeah.
So there was a phase of that, of pushing in. I mean, I don't know how many times people would say to me, thank you for your enthusiasm. Which was just a way of saying, can you tone it down a bit? And I know, bless the people who either worked with me or around me. I'll tell you one time where I will just own up to being a petulant worship leader.
Yeah.
This is years ago, but I was leading Sunday morning church and we were about 10 minutes in. And if you have been in the presence of God for actively and you've prepared your heart and you're already there, then to meet with a group of people who are warming up. There was a Sunday where I just said, right, I've had enough.
Oh, I remember this.
So 10 minutes in or so, and it was like,
hitting a brick
how
wall.
much can you encourage people? How much is it? Do we want to leave people just where they are? And there is a level where we must respect where people are and what they're coming with. Who knows what happened to them during the week? But this was a Sunday morning. So anyway, after about 10, maybe at the most 15 minutes, I just thought, I am not doing this. I've reached my limit. So after a song, I didn't break halfway through a song or whatever. I just finished the song off and took the guitar off, plonked it on the stand and just went and sat down. And as I looked, I could see the leaders going and my husband going and the rest of the musicians going, what on earth? And I just sat down.
And what happened?
Well, I think my memory is that my husband had a quick word and said, are you all right? And I just said, we're not doing this. If we're not going to worship, let's not mess around. Yeah. Let's do something else that will draw people in or whatever. So I think he got up and did something and then we went back into worship. Okay. And by that time, I think people got a shock because it's like, I'm not doing this. If you're not doing, we're doing this together.
Totally.
Now, perhaps I didn't have the greatest of skill of drawing people into the presence of God or whatever. There's a whole lot of questions there. But I think I was entering there is more to this and we need to feel him and see him and know him and experience him and sacrifice ourselves and lay our lives down and enter into the vastness of who he is, his character and his heavens. There is so much here for us.
Sure.
And you guys.
Yeah.
This isn't working, church.
No, I think that this is like a common problem. Like what I hear, so I have a few girls, actually most in the UK, who are on voice notes quite often to me. And they're basically saying, how do you get unity in a room? How do you get your people to actually sing? I've got 5 people who raise their hands and are very charismatic, and I've got a room full of 25 who are sitting in their chairs and saying, well, I'm worshipping on my insides, and that's plenty. And how do I navigate that? Now, I have my own thoughts about this, so I'll chip in, but what is your kind of instincts on strategy. Sometimes maybe getting off the platform and having a shock moment for a congregation is strategic.
Can I just say, I wouldn't recommend a petulant moment. I'm just confessing my sin to everybody.
No, but what can people do in moments like that?
I think the leadership of, if it's let's say it's a meeting, a church meeting, I think the leadership of that meeting and the example of the leaders is really important. Now, my husband is not a particularly extroverted character, and he isn't going to be the first one up the front to be dancing or to be demonstrative. That's not who he is. However, he made a choice as the leader. He knew if he didn't do it, nobody else would.
Yeah.
It was a sacrifice. So I think leadership is really important. And my husband was a great man for making sure he was present at the front when he was responsible.
That's good.
And as demonstrative as was appropriate for him, without doing something that wasn't natural to him.
Yeah.
And he would love to get a flag or a staff out. He knew if he didn't get out a staff when we would do warfare worship, how could he expect anybody else to?
Yeah.
So leadership is really important. And I would say to those who are struggling, and if you're finding that your group of people isn't coming with you, you need to partner that with your church leader.
That's really good.
Or leaders. They need to be modeling the oneness with the worship
good,
leader.
Really good.
That is going to be, and pray and talk honestly to your leaders.
Yeah.
Because they may have some clues that you haven't thought of. You may feel quite isolated. Now, if we do get on to talking about isolated worship leaders on a stage, that's a whole topic in itself.
Okay.
Not the way it should be. Because where does the true leadership of where it's going lie?
In the corporate.
Well, the leaders of the church, they need to be honing, working with the worship leaders,
leader.
so it is as one. So that effort is not left
on us.
It's
really good. We had Emma on for 4 episodes, so we did a whole episode on relational building between senior leaders and worship leaders. So if you haven't seen that, go and check it out. But yeah, I think that connection is one of the most important connections in the room, because if we can't work together, really it's not going anywhere. I know that when I took over worship leading in my last place of worship, my leader was basically like, just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
He stood on the front row, he worshipped extrovertedly, he had my back the whole way. And I just said, there's so much more to this, and I can't even get them to open their mouths and sing. I said, do you mind if I'm a little extreme about it? And he said, do whatever you want, babe. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, number one, I started to communicate in an education, a teaching way about worship, because we really hadn't had that. And so a lot of times, especially if you're talking about an older generation, they're looking for a biblical backup of what you're asking them to do. So if you're going to ask them to raise their hands, you better be able to cite it in scripture. And so I studied the 7 Hebrew words for praise, and then I taught that out. Just like 5 minutes before every Sunday morning, I would say, today God's been highlighting the halal of worship. And here is
Go for the ultimate, why don't you?
Yeah. And here is where it commands us.
Yeah.
It's not an option. It's not something we're supposed to do. It's a command from God. And so if we do not do this, if we don't enter into this expression, we're actually in disobedience. And that thought, because what they were looking was for theology and they were Bible people, that was enough to push them over the edge and say, well, actually, okay, I need to submit myself to this word that is from the Bible. And so that really helped me in my context to break open worship. The other thing I did was I said, I am not willing to stand up here and perform. And so until you can make a sound together of worship, I'm not going to sing. And so we stood in silence. And I waited for the sound to come from the people. And the first morning, I think it was like, it felt like forever that the silence went on until someone was brave enough to start to sing, and then the room starts to join. And then we went into corporate worship. And, you know, the next week we did the same thing, and the next week after. And by the time 5 weeks was on, they knew. I didn't even have to ask them. We just played a chord in the whole room. Kira basanda, you know, and they were all in.
And I think that's a really good point, Ali, that we do need teaching. I don't know that we have too much teaching on actually how to worship and the dynamics of being together, corporate worship.
Yeah.
I rejoiced when he said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord.
Yeah.
So we're grabbing somebody together and we're running together to that place of worship. And even the understanding, I mean, every word for praise, every Hebrew word has a physical aspect as well as
love that about
a spirit,
it. It's
soul,
so
body.
good. Yeah.
So if you're somebody who does not move a muscle in worship, you need to know you are contrary to Scripture.
Absolutely.
And you know, and then it's like, well, let's not just feel like any condemnation. Instead, start with your little finger, or start with tapping your foot,
Totally.
or start with something, and allow your body come into alignment with your spirit and your soul.
Absolutely.
Because it's a full spirit, soul, body exercise.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about worship is good for us.
Yes, it is.
It's good for our emotions. It's
even by the
good for our
world's
bodies.
standards.
Absolutely.
You can look it up in science. Everything that we do in worship
Everything that we
is
do.
absolutely beneficial
Yes.
for your whole being.
Why is it that you can get, 40,000, 80,000 people in a stadium for a football game? The majority may be men. And what happens?
The whole place.
Lights up and they sing the same song.
They have sound, they have movement.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, I mean, I have to say, my husband is a rugby fan.
Okay.
And it's the one place where I see the extreme of his expression. Not actually, still not so much in worship.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, no matter where I am in the house or garden, I know what's happening with that rugby game and when his team have scored.
Yes.
And he shouts at the ref. So...
Totally.
It's there, but we need to uncap the fullness of people. So having ways not so that people don't feel condemned, but they actually feel helped. And that's
permission.
one thing that I have learned. And if I had it all over again, because I was on my own journey, I don't think I was so much helpful to people.
Okay.
If I had it again, I would be a lot more encouraging and patient and teach some things out so that they were invited and understood what was happening.
Yeah,
because
it's good.
sometimes that's really how people respond. See, I don't respond like that. I catch something or I sense something and I go with it and my mind will catch up later. But not everybody is like that.
No, it's true. Yes. So I think like if we're at Bobby Basics here, so we're trying to encourage people like how you can get your congregation on the go.
Yeah.
And obviously you had your moment where you sat down and all of that.
I'm not doing this.
Where then, once you managed to get everyone on the page, because I know that you had a great community when you guys were leading your own congregation, and they were very expressive worshippers.
They were.
And how did you get them from that place? Like, what were the next steps? And, we talk about the staffs. We do staffs now here at GPA. You'll have seen them in our photos. That's a Louise and Nigel idea. Like, what was that about? How did that come around? And, like, how did you get your people to that place?
Well, we had others in the congregation who had other interests in worship. See, I have to say, worship is not about music. It involves music. And music is a very powerful expression of worship, but it's only one expression.
Sure.
I'm more interested in sound.
Yes.
Because we are to resound with the sound of heaven. And each of us are instruments. So the understanding of that is really, then it takes the pressure off people who say, well, I don't play an instrument or I don't sing very well. Not
Doesn't
a
matter.
problem.
Yeah.
Not a problem. But we had several people in our congregation who were very interested in movement in worship.
Okay.
Now, can I say, this isn't the old-fashioned put on a floaty dress and get out your tambourine with a few ribbons.
Okay.
It wasn't about that. It was about prophetic movement. So when you say things like, how do you get people up and moving? Well, at the end of our time with that particular church, when we used to hire venues, the chairs were only put around the edge.
I remember seeing photos.
And the dance,
Like a dance floor
was open and everybody was on the dance floor. The worship team weren't raised. It wasn't a platform. We were on the ground. We used to be able to do it that way.
Yeah.
And everybody was involved, and there was colour and there was life. We had hundreds, it seemed, of flags and materials, and we had a river, and we had rainbows, and we had all sorts of things. But it wasn't tacky.
No.
It was tastefully done.
Sure.
And it was led by very gifted people. One girl in particular, incredibly gifted in movement. And she would teach the people how to respond in worship.
Wow.
So sometimes our worship wasn't even led by a song. It could be led by sound and by movement. And then the song would come. We are so unbelievably uncreative in church.
We are.
And boring.
Yeah.
Now, you can't do everything. We did sometimes have people painting and that kind of thing as well, but we more pushed into the movement.
Okay.
And we connected with other groups that knew more than we did, and they taught us, and they came and did workshops with us and all of that kind of thing. So we weren't just banging staffs on the ground in warfare.
Yeah.
There was a whole load of things we did with staffs as an expression of worship and as a prophetic expression of what God was doing. Now, you see, this is where worship takes on a whole different level.
Yes.
Because instead of being... we're singing songs and maybe just going somewhere in the realms, going somewhere in the spirit, and we may get some prophetic release. We may be in the Corinthian scriptures of one has a psalm and one has a tongue and one has a bit of this and a bit of the other, and it's we put it all in together. There's that part of it, which I have to say I think we have lost to some level in our worship, and I say bring that back somehow without losing what we already have. But the creativity of being as one group together, where in the worship, while it's still all happening, we're saying, what are we seeing? What's happening in the spirit? So conversations can be going on while worship is still happening. So it's kind of like a continuous, instead of just a few songs here and a bit of input along the way, but it's like a symphony. And it's like we have the first movement and then the second movement and the third movement or whatever. And we never know what's going to happen. Because there's the glorious uncertainty of what God is going to do. And that's where, can I rabbit on for a minute on my pet thing that I love? Psalm 22, you know, his presence, his power, his kingdom is established on our praises. Okay, so what's that all about? We're looking in this day and age of the ecclesia, we're looking to be in areas of worship because this is the era that we're in. Our worship must understand war. Our worship must understand governmental authority. We need to know what it is to go to those realms in worship so those things can be released. This is all really important. Let your kingdom be established on our praises. Psalm 22. So, what is that? Praise. Well, that's going back to the Hebrew words. That's the Tehillah praise.
It's always the good one, I'm not going to lie.
And look, I remember a preacher coming to our church once, and he was trying to help us. This was in the early days, trying to help us into spontaneous worship and learning how just to let go and sing whatever's in your heart. Well, if you're used to being well behaved and singing the words that are up on it was the
It's a
overhead
hard-
projector in those days. It's kind of hard to do.
It's a big ask.
And then I remember him saying this. He said, look, it's like the Hallmark card. You get a birthday card or a Christmas card or anniversary card or something in the post, and you open it, and inside there is a lovely verse that somebody who knows how to write poetry, a verse has been put in there, and it's lovely. But is that the bit that you read?
No.
No. What you do is you go to the bottom and you read who it's from and their personal comment to you. That's the bit you go to.
That's so good.
First, because that's the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
That's the personal connection. That's the heart of the person. That's their words. And a lot of our worship, and can I just say, we have fantastic songs that are written. And Ali, you're writing great stuff these days, and well done, and keep going. But here's the thing. I really believe the Lord, he looks and he loves our sung worship. He loves what we repeat. I mean, let's face it, the word is full of repetition. But the bit he's looking for
is the tehillah.
What touches his heart? It's the tehillah praise,
is.
which is the spontaneous, it's unrehearsed.
It's your offering.
It's your offering, it's your sacrifice, it's the bit with your signature on it. And that's the bit. And that's the bit in the Psalms that says that's where he establishes his kingdom.
Totally.
Those are the praises of Israel.
Yeah.
So I find that really... that's a vulnerable thing.
Yes, it is.
A very vulnerable thing, but glorious. This is the type of worship. We've got to get uncomfortable. We've got to get real. We've got to stop worrying about how pretty it sounds.
Yeah.
Now, can I just say on that the following week, after that sermon, I think it was our wedding anniversary, and I got a card from somebody who sends me cards every year for my anniversary, a family member, and like fair dues to her. Anyway, for the first time ever, I opened the card and it was unsigned. And it hit my heart because God showed me so clearly
practical
what it's like when I'm just repeating. Now, of course, the verse was beautiful and I could read it. There was no signature.
No personal.
And I've had a number of instances. One time in particular, I was quite proud of a song set that we put together. It was for a national sort of conferencey thing in Ireland that we were doing. I was quite proud of the set.
Decisions
I thought this is good. This has the flow of the spirit. Everybody's going to feel this. You know the way.
I know the ones.
And we started off, and no sooner had we started, I heard the Lord speak so clearly to my heart. And he just said, I've heard this one before.
Oh!
It's like, yeah, but I think you like it, Lord. But I knew what he was saying.
Yeah.
Saying, don't default. Don't just default back to what others have written. I'm looking for your sound. And this is what I would say to I mean, it's a little step further. We want to get people worshipping and we want the fullness of worship. But honestly, every family, every individual, every church, every city, every nation has their own sound. Yeah. Every culture has their own sound. Don't just be repeating what you've heard before, but find out what the sound of heaven is in you. Also the sound of the people and sound of the culture. And let that be a fresh offering, fresh sound, fresh release to God.
Important.
I'll tell you, he will land on that.
He will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's my favourite of the 7 Hebrew words.
Is it?
For praise. And it's also the word that's used when Jehoshaphat sends the worshippers in and the enemy turns on himself. And we often use that as a a reflection of worship being warfare. But it's not just any worship, it's the tehillah that causes the enemy to turn on himself. So let's round that up there, because we can go into all kinds of things. I have loved this conversation. If you are listening in, it's been such a pleasure. Let us know if you have any questions about anything that Louisa says. We can pull her back in here anytime and answer those. But other than that, we will see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to the Prophetic Worship Podcast, part of the Global Prophetic Alliance. If you want to stay up to date with everything that we are doing, you can follow us on social media at GPA Worship. You can also find all of our music on every streaming platform under GPA Worship. We will see you on the next episode.